Welcome, everybody. It's a big group today. Thank you all for taking the time to be here today with me and with the Chamber of Commerce. My name is 𝗿𝗲𝘀𝗶𝗱𝗲𝗲, and I'm an attorney with VANEPS. I specialize in administrative employment and immigration law. And today we're going to talk about an interesting topic that actually covers all of those areas, namely the resident status and the work permits for your employees. Curaçao is a relatively small population. And because of that, many companies cannot avoid attracting employees from abroad. And many of you will presumably be here today because you employ foreigners or you wish to do so in the future. Well, I will give you an overview of some important matters of immigration law today, and I invite you to interrupt me. I love to be interrupted, otherwise I can hear myself talk after too long of time. So don't be afraid to raise your hands. If you are uncomfortable talking in this big of a group, please feel free to put your answer in the chat or email me later after this presentation. So without further ado, we go to the overview of today. This is what we're going to talk about. If you have a question about another subject, feel free to ask that after the presentation as well. We're going to focus today on Curaçao. Our law firm covers all jurisdictions. So if you have a question about the Best Islands or Aruba or St. Martin, we can help you with that as well. So first off, I would like to get to know you a little bit and get a bit of a feel for the room. So I have a proposition for you. Due to the administrative hassle with applying foreigners, I would rather hire a local or a Dutch employee. If you think so, could you raise your hands? See quite a few hands going up. And I must say, I would personally put up my hand for this question as well. It is not that easy to hire a foreigner, and it is a lot easier to hire a local or Dutch employee. So I can see as a company, you would not necessarily be looking forward to all the administrative hassle that it takes to employ a foreigner, but hopefully we will be able to help you a little bit with that today. Thank you all for raising your hand. I have a second question for you. It looks a little bit like the first, but don't be fooled. Due to the administrative hassle with foreigners, I would rather hire a Dutch or a local employee, even if the foreigner is a better fit for my company. See a little bit more doubt here. I can see that some of you prefer to hire the foreigner that's a little bit of a better fit, but I see that some of you still kind of want to avoid all the paperwork that it takes. So it's good that you're going to learn a little bit more about that today. First of all, it's important that we understand the difference between the different groups of immigrants, because not all foreigners are made equal on the Curaçao law. We can divide the foreigners into three categories that I have given medals to. We have a gold medal winner, a silver medal winner, and we have the loser, which is the lead category. The gold goes to the islanders. They are defined in more detail in the law. But to summarize, islanders are people born on Curaçao or on the Netherlands Antilles and their kids. So on Curaçao, it doesn't matter when they are born. The Netherlands Antilles stopped existing at 10-10-10, so before 10-10-10, or when Aruba was still part of the Netherlands Antilles, which was 1986. And their children, of course, are a little bit of a bigger group. The silver medal goes to the European Dutch citizens and Americans. Some additional conditions are imposed opposed to islanders, but they're still relatively easy to immigrate. And the lead medal, actually that is not a medal at all, is lead because this category can be slightly toxic if you don't handle it well. This is basically every other nationality that is not an islander, not a European, Dutch, or American citizen. Starting off with the gold, the islanders. When islanders want to move to Curaçao, they are in principle welcome. The principle behind that is that if you are born on Curaçao or born on the Netherlands Antilles, you are welcome to move back to the country you are born in and have the citizenship of. Because your children also are from your country, it's also their country of origin because you are their parent. This privilege or this right expands to them as well. So formally for these people, there is no immigration process applicable. And I say that in principle because there is an immigration process applicable. The government, because the government needs to confirm you are part of this category. And they call that a declaration not applicable, even though the declaration is actually applicable. The only thing they do is check if you are indeed part of this category. And you have to prove that by giving your passport and your birth certificate. Or if you are the children of one of the people from the Netherlands Antilles, you have to give your passport, your birth certificate, and the birth certificates of your parents. Once that is established, so once they know you're a part of this category, you get your declaration, and that's the end of that. There is no need for a criminal background check. There is no need for to prove you have sufficient means because this is your country. And even if you are a hardened criminal with no money, you are in principle welcome to live there because you will not become stateless for those reasons. This is also the cheapest category. It's only 255 guilders. So if someone applies for a job and they maybe say, like, I used to live on the islands when I was young, I would recommend to check if they are part of this category because that will save both you and them a lot of work and money. The second category are our silver medal winners. These are all other Dutch nationals. So that includes people from the European Dutch, which I define it as. Technically not fully true because also people that are born later on the Basque Islands fall in this category if their parents are from abroad. So it's a little bit broader, but basically this is the European Netherlands and the US nationals. They apply for a so-called Declaration of Admittance by Law. Why US citizens, you may ask? That is because of a treaty from the 50s. It's called the Dutch-American Treaty of Friendship, Commerce and Navigation. And in this treaty, there is a protocol that says American citizens must be treated equally with Dutch nationals, and not necessarily with islanders, but because of that treaty, we treat them the same, and they can both apply for this declaration. For employers, which I assume to be you, this is the easiest group of foreigners because they do not require a work permit. They do require a little bit more information than the islanders. They require a certificate of good conduct, or VOG in Dutch, and they require proof of sufficient means to support themselves and their families if they're bringing their families to Curaçao with them as well. Americans are treated the same, but there are some slight differences that is good to be aware of. The US specific, the VOG, or the Certificate of Good Conduct, can in the US be applied for with the state, so let's say Florida or Washington, but also with the full country. They need the full country one because the immigration authorities want to make sure that you didn't commit a crime out of state that is not shown on the state certificate. The full country one is applied for with the FBI, and it involves rolling your fingerprints and sending those to the FBI, which I assume they check in the system if they ever saw your fingerprints at the crime scene. That's the one you need. So make sure that if you hire an American, that they apply for the right certificate. The second thing that is important for Americans is apostilles. An apostille is a document from a foreign government that confirms the document that it is added to is real. So if you have an American marriage certificate, if you have an American VOG, if you have an American birth certificate, it needs to have an apostille because the Curaçao government cannot check whether this American document is some copy that photoshopped or whether it is real. So therefore, it needs that. EU documents, so not only Dutch documents, but European documents from the European Union countries do not need such an apostille because Curaçao can confirm themselves whether the document is real or not. So, and the last category is the most dreaded one, the potentially toxic one, and that is the lead category of the others. This contains basically everybody that is not American or Dutch. On the Best Islands, we have some friends that get some preferential treatment, EU countries, Norway, Australia, a couple others, but Curaçao does not have such friends, so they treat everybody in this category basically the same. As an employer, it is important to know that these people need a work permit, or actually you need a work permit to employ these people. These people need a residence permit and be able to stay in Curaçao legally. Those are two different things. And they may require a visa to travel to Curaçao, depending on their nationality. You can find that on the website of the Ministry of Foreign Affairs. While they are awaiting all these documents, the people need to wait abroad. The reason for that is that if they await all these documents on Curaçao and they get denied, that sometimes they stay on Curaçao anyway. So to avoid that, they need to wait abroad. It doesn't really matter where abroad, as long as it's not on Curaçao. The documents from these countries, let's say you get an immigrant from Russia, need to be translated in either English or Dutch. English is usually the easiest. Formally, by law, German and French documents do also not need to be translated. But in my experience, it is a bit difficult for people in our jurisdictions to read German and French, actually also in the Netherlands. So that can cause some confusion. So usually they prefer you translate those documents as well. Actually, Spanish is super common on Curaçao, also with the government institution to speak. So sometimes they don't mind if a Spanish document is still in Spanish. But I do recommend to translate everybody or everything in either Dutch or English. Furthermore, documents that are not from the EU, they need to have the apostille we just talked about with the Americans. An apostille can be obtained in most countries. And when I say most, I mean 117 countries that is possible to get an apostille in. That leaves 78 countries that you cannot get an apostille in. And what happens in these countries with the documents, you may ask? These have to be legalized. And legalized means that you go to the Ministry of Foreign Affairs of this country, they confirm it's real, and then you send the document to the embassy of the Netherlands that covers that country. Most countries have their own embassies. Some countries do not have their own embassy, and it needs to go abroad. This process can take a bit longer because it involves two institutions. It depends per country how long, but usually it takes a little bit longer than apostille. I see a couple hands raised. I am not completely sure if this was still for my propositions or whether someone has a question. If you have a question, maybe you can put in the chat. I really do have a question, and therefore I have my hands raised. And then the ladies from the Curaçao Chamber of Commerce will look at your question. But I notice your hands, and we are looking at them. If you really have a question, please let me know. Well, if we hire someone from that lead category, and if we need a work permit, how does that work? The work permit, or in Dutch de werkstellingsvergunning, or 𝗲𝗺𝗃𝗃𝗃. The necessity of that is laid down in the Landsverordening Arbeid Vreemdelingen, basically the foreigners' employment law. A work permit is the responsibility of the employer. In Dutch, you hear that a little bit more, de werkstellingsvergunning, not werkvergunning. So you, as an employer, just as you need an alcohol license, just as you need a business license, you may need a work permit to hire the specific employee and let that employee work for you. You are also the one getting fined if you don't have one. So this is really important to remember, that it is both your responsibility and your risk. The fines actually are pretty high. They can go up to, by law, 100,000 guilders per employee. So if you have 10 without a work permit, you can go up to 1 million. That doesn't really happen. Another thing that is possible that doesn't really happen is that you can go for 3 months per employee to jail for not having a work permit. Also doesn't really happen. The punishments don't get this crazy, but it is really a risk you don't want to take. So I really want to say, do not do it. It is not worth it, even if the chance is small. it is too big of a risk. So we need a work permit. And how do we get that? That's the most important thing, of course. Step one is look for a local. As we just established, locals are easier to hire, but it's also necessary to have tried in order to obtain a work permit for a foreigner afterwards. You have to look for a local for at least 5 weeks. You do this by notifying 𝗀𝗁𝗁𝗲𝗃 that you have a vacancy and what that withholds. They have a whole process for this to notify them, and they will look in their database if they have something suitable to fulfill that position. Second thing is to publish your vacancy in 2 media. For example, big Facebook groups, 𝗀𝗺𝘀𝗁𝗲𝗃. These are good medias to post your vacancy in, and they have kind of a large width, but you can also do it in a paper. It's basically up to you what you think is the most effective for your company. The second step is you have waited 5 weeks, you cannot find anybody local, so you do want to hire a foreigner and you have found someone suitable. Then you apply for it with the permits office for the work permit. So you apply for it for this employee. The permits office should react within 6 weeks. So do take into account that it can be a little bit longer, but they should react within 6 weeks. And this total process, so 5 weeks of searching local and 6 weeks of waiting for the permit office, should take you around 3 months. That is a bit of a long time if you really need an employee. And you also need a residence permit for your employee afterwards, which we're getting to. So do plan ahead. We see a lot of larger companies that need a lot of staff all the time to have permanently vacancies open online and to have permanently vacancies open with 𝗀𝗁𝗁𝗲𝗃. So for example, let's say you're in a hotel, you always need cleaning staff. Just make sure that there's always vacancies for cleaning staff. That saves you 5 weeks if you want to enter in this process. A few important things to know regarding work permits. It is first of all important and sometimes misunderstood that if someone applies for a job with you and already has a 𝗀𝗁𝗁𝗲, sometimes people think, oh, they have 𝗀𝗁𝗁𝗁𝗲, so that is all figured out. I don't need to apply for anything. That is not true. A 𝗀𝗁𝗁𝗁𝗲 does not mean that you do not need a work permit. A Dutch passport or US passport means that you do not need a work permit, and that's the only thing that has that consequence, or permanent residency card, or proof of permanent residency. There's actually not a card that says that. So a 𝗀𝗁𝗁𝗁𝗲 doesn't mean anything. It just means that that person is legally on Bonaire. Maybe that person is married to someone that has a status. Maybe that person works somewhere else. He has a company, he was an intern. It can mean all kinds of things. It does definitely not mean that you do not need a work permit. An application needs to be approved, not pending. So what you cannot do is hire someone, file permit application, and then immediately put them to work. You cannot do that. It is just as illegal as not filing an application at all. So make sure you actually wait till it is approved. An application needs to be renewed every year. A permit is usually given for a year. Once the permit is done, it needs to be extended, and you need to do the whole process all over again. You need to go again to 𝗀𝗁𝗁𝗁𝗲𝗃, you need to again wait 5 weeks, and you need to again apply for the permit, which again will take 6 weeks. So make sure you plan ahead. This extension of the work permit is also the case when you have an employment agreement with someone for an indefinite time. So let's say this person has been working for you for 5 years. As you may know, after 3 years, someone has an employment agreement for indefinite time, and you cannot that easily fire them. Even then, you need to go to the work permit process every year. Even then, you need to look for local. So make sure that if you have employees that have such an employment agreement, that you have a resolutive condition, or in Dutch, een bindende voorwaarde, in the employment agreement, that if they do not get this work permit, which is not your fault, it's the government's fault, that their employment agreement ends. I see a couple questions in the chat. Let me see, 𝗀𝗁𝗁𝗁𝗲𝗃, can you maybe read out the question? Is that possible? don't think Shanti has. I
Marley,
will read out.
I
sorry.
see the first question here. The Canadian citizens are in the lead group, question mark.
Canadians not. No, that's there's a treaty specifically between the United States and the Netherlands. So Canada is not included in this agreement, so they are part of the others.
Okay, and that is the only question that was open.
I see a couple. Do you see? I see one that says, "How do you know when a permit is needed when someone has a 𝗿𝗂𝘀𝗀𝗃?" You get the 𝗿𝗂𝘀𝗀𝗃 you get from 𝗀𝗁𝗃. What you get from the immigration authority is a paper. This paper is your residence permit. In this residence permit, it will say what you're allowed to do and what you're not allowed to do. If someone, for example, has permanent residency, which we will later get to, it will say so in the paper from the immigration authorities. So a 𝗿𝗂𝘀𝗀𝗃 is great for many things, but it's not great for immigration. The only document that is relevant for immigration is the paper that you get from the immigration authorities, and all the information will be in there. And let me see, if the work permit belongs to the employer, why can it not be transferred to another employer? That's a good question. It's actually similar to, let's say, an alcohol license. If I have a business, let's say a bar, and I apply for an alcohol license, and my cousin opens also a bar in Rincon, let's say, on the other side of Bonaire, I cannot transfer my alcohol license to him. He needs to apply for his own alcohol license. It works the same with a work permit. You apply for the work permit. Your company has that work permit. You can employ, let's say, Carlos, no problem. But if Hotel Iguana wants to apply Carlos, they need to get their own work permit, and it needs to be their work permit. I will go through the questions later, but keep asking them. I will get to them all eventually. So once we have the work permit, we need to get a residence permit. I say we, I actually do not mean we, the employee needs to get the residence permit. Because you get a work permit, the employee gets a residence permit. The employee can also apply for it. Usually the employer helps. That makes it a little bit easier, especially for employees who are not like the first time or something. It can be a little bit daunting to do it all yourself, but they can in principle apply for it themselves. It is usually a fixed term of 1 year. So you need to extend it every year. The first application should be awaited abroad. All the extensions can be awaited in Curaçao. So once you immigrated, you don't have to leave the country every year to await your extensions. That can be awaited in Curaçao. It usually takes 4 months. At least that's what the government indicates, that it will take 4 months. And you need to do this every year till you get your permanent status. And we already mentioned it in the ad. Permanent status is what we're kind of all working towards. Permanent residency, or in Dutch, vergunning tot verblijf. These are absolutely great. Once you have these, you don't need a work permit. You don't need a yearly trip to the immigration with all the papers. You don't need to pay all the fees. You don't need to renew your 𝗿𝗂𝘀𝗀𝗃 every year. And your income may fluctuate. It's great for the employee. So if you lose your job for a little bit, that is not the end of the world with this permit. It might be the end of your residency with the other permit. And this is only possible after 10 years of continuous residence. So you apply for the first one, 9 extensions, and after that, this is the one you can get. If a foreigner already has one of these, which you can confirm not by the 𝗿𝗂𝘀𝗀𝗃, but with the immigration paper that they get from the toelatingsorganisatie, immigration office in English, that will say whether it is this one or the other one. This one is called the vergunning tot verblijf. The other one is vergunning tot tijdelijk verblijf. The temporary one is a hassle, but this one is great. So if you want to hire foreigners, try to look for these. I can imagine that many foreigners do not want to wait 10 years to get the certainty that a permanent status rewards them. 10 years is a very long time. It is also possible to get a permanent status earlier, and that is by going the naturalization route. In other words, becoming Dutch. It can be done a little bit quicker if you have a Dutch partner, then it can be the thing you want to inform your employees about. That it is required that you speak both Dutch and Papiamento in a way that is decent. It's A2 level. It's not the highest, most complicated Dutch and Papiamento, but you need to do an exam in both. I see a question.
Can I speak?
The floor is yours. Yes.
Yeah. The question that I asked, I think it was misunderstood. If the work permit belongs to an employer, and normally it takes very long time for the permits to be processed, and by the time the case happened with me a couple of times, when by the time I got the permit, the employee on the other end got another job already. He couldn't wait for so long. So I had to apply. I had to find another person, and I had to reapply the 5 weeks and then get the permit again. So if the work permit, my question was, the work permit belongs to the employer and the employee is not willing to come anymore, why should the employer go through the process of applying for another person and facing that same dilemma again?
Yeah, it is really, honestly, I agree with you. This is not a great system, but it is a system we have to deal with. We have, as an employer, we apply for a permit to hire this specific employee. So if I apply for a permit for Carlos, I cannot use it for Juliana. I need to apply for a new permit for Juliana. It is like applying for an alcohol license, but every drink you need a new license, and it is kind of like that. The reason for this is to make it a bit more difficult to hire foreigners and to make it a bit more tempting to go for someone local. And my colleague is leaving.
It's already so difficult to hire foreigners. The red tape is
yeah.
my God. Yeah.
And honestly, like, because we can hire, if we look, we can hire all the Americans, we can hire all the Dutch people in total. That is like 350 million. So you can ask if you're really helping the Curaçao labor market with these rules. That I leave that up to the politicians. But it is what it is, and they do it a little bit to make it harder. So they are trying to make it hard, and it is hard. So they are succeeding in making it hard.
All right, understood.
Thank you so much. The citizenship does make it easier. Once they are Dutch, they are super easy to hire. So you can do that after 5 years or after 3 years if they have a Dutch partner. They need to pass a Dutch and Papiamento test. Maybe that's something you can help with like maybe study budget or something, because it's not that high of a level. You need to like, hey, hallo, ik ben Marlie, ik ga naar de supermarkt. That kind of level of Dutch. You need to be able to speak, understand, right? And that kind of level of Papiamento as well. If you do not have a Dutch partner, or another exception, you need to give up your former nationality. This is a big step for a lot of people, because that can usually means that they have to go to an immigration process if they want to move back to their home country. And usually this route is more in demand with people that have like a more difficult passport. For example, Venezuelan people like this route. In the Netherlands is very popular with people from Syria, Palestine, the kind of passport you go to the airport with, and it's always a hassle. They prefer the Dutch passport. There's a couple passports you cannot give up. From my top of my head, I know it's at least the Moroccan one. I think it's also Turkey. I'm pretty sure they have some rules for the US, because we love the US, so we have always nice rules for the US. So there's a couple exceptions to giving up your nationality. If you want to know those, please contact me. But in principle, you have to give up your nationality unless you are married to a Dutch person or have a registered partnership or whatever. Then you do not need to do that, because then they say like, oh yeah, it's based on your family. You want to be with your family. We don't make you give up your nationality for that. But if you really choose to become Dutch, for no family reasons whatsoever, you do need to give it up in principle. It's also a bit expensive. It's like a Bonaire, it's $1,000, probably it's 2,000 guilders on Curaçao. It takes about a year. So it does take time, money, a little bit of effort, but after that, you have all your problems are solved. For these great solutions that everybody wants, we need to have continuous residence. In other words, we do not need gaps. We cannot have gaps at all. If we have gaps, we have a big problem. The Raad van State is the highest administrative law court in the Netherlands, in The Hague to be exact, says you have continuous residence if you have continuous residence permits. What does that mean? That means that every extension you get has to be exactly on the date your other permit lapses. So if your permit ends on the 30th of June, your new one needs to start on the 1st of July. Does it start on the 2nd of July? Then you immediately have a problem. And even if you are on Curaçao legally on the 1st of July. So it doesn't matter if you are legal or illegal. You don't have to be legal at all to get these gaps. A couple of examples of when you're lawfully in Curaçao, but you can still get a gap, is if you are awaiting the approval of your extension. So if your permit lapses and you're still waiting for the approval for the next one, you do not have your residency in between. That's a problem we see actually most times. Most gaps come from that one. A second one is the immigration authorities decide later on that you didn't meet the requirements a while ago. So then they retract your permit for like a week or so, that you didn't meet the requirements, and they create the gap. We saw this one time, someone he was working for a car rental place. He was going to work for a garage, and he said to the car rental place, I will stop on the 1st of March. And he said to the garage, I will start on the 14th. I'll take 2 weeks of vacation. The immigration authorities figured that out, and they say you didn't have an employer in those 2 weeks. You had a residence permit based on employment. Because you didn't have an employer, you have a gap. If you have a gap, you have to again start that period of 5 years for the passport or 10 years for the permanent status. That is very annoying, especially if you are very close to the end. So you really do want to try to avoid these. The most common causes of these gaps is when people switch employer. So we just discussed that, when you have a new employer, the work permit is employer-based. So your new employer need to apply for a new work permit, and that takes a while. We all know it takes a while. So within this while, we can come into a situation where that person is at that moment not hired. We can avoid this situation usually when we make sure that the employment agreement we give the foreigner directly connects to the end of his employment agreement with the former employer. So the guy from the garage that we had here in Bonaire, the problem was that he left his job on the 28th of February and he started his job on the 14th of March. If he would have started his job on the 1st of March, there would have been no issue. So if you employ a foreigner and they're coming from a different company, please make sure that the employment agreements connect and that you don't create accidental gaps. What also happens is that people sometimes forget a document, the application. You need to file a lot of documents, so it's very easy to forget one. And the immigration authority doesn't issue a permit with start date before they receive all the documents. So let's say you file your all the stuff on the 1st of April. They can give you a start date the 1st of April, even when they make their decision in June. They can still say it started on the 1st of April. They can do that. What they cannot do is you file it on the 1st of April, you give your documents on the 15th. Then it starts on the 15th. So make sure that you file all your documents. We have had this happening where people file their applications and immigration authorities say, take a week to file your documents. They did, and they have a gap because they took a week that the immigration authority said they could take. So they're really strict with this. So if you're an employer, maybe check it with your employee, make sure they have everything. It's really important. Third reason that we see happening sometimes is a mistake from the immigration authority. It's not super common, but it does happen. It's really easy to fix, actually. If this is really the problem, the only thing we have to do is like file a letter, explaining, hey, I see you made a mistake. If they really did, they say, sorry, we fixed it, no problem. The problem is you can only do this within a month. If you discover it after a month, you can formally not send that letter anymore. You cannot fix it. So once your employee gets the permit, make sure you check it, make sure there's no mistake in it. And if there's a mistake, fix it immediately, because that's the moment you can still do that. If it goes wrong, they are really strict. Are they really this strict? They are really strict. They really are. They don't feel the compassion like, oh, it was 9 years, almost 10. It's a little mistake. No. The immigration authorities are very bureaucratic on little details, on little gaps. Even if we bring a case to court, which costs a lot of money and time, and we win the case, they usually appeal it, which very easily, if we have to fix a mistake like this via the court, even if we are right, it takes 2 years and thousands of dollars. So usually we do not do that. It's possible, but it is really a lot easier to prevent because it's hard and it is expensive to cure. How can you prevent this? Help your employees. Know your, as I said now, but I mean know the residency goals of your employees. If someone come for you and say, like, I'm here on 3 years on Curaçao, after that I go back to my family, residence gap doesn't really matter because they don't want a passport, they don't want permanent status. That is okay. But do you know from your employee that they want to stay on Curaçao, that they maybe want to become Dutch? Make sure there's no gaps, like help them a little bit with this. As a company, it's good to make a step-by-step plan. This is a lot of administration. So if you start with this hassle, make a plan, make all the steps in it, maybe put little Outlook calendar reminders when you have to do something for a certain employee, and really be on top of it, because it's really sad situation if you make a little mistake as an employer and it has huge consequences for this employee who you like because you employed them for already years. And this is something you really want to avoid. So if you want help with this plan, we have these plans. We can give you these plans, and we can really help you figure that out for your company. As I said, cedula does not mean status. Please do not make that mistake. We had expensive mistakes like this. Employees got fines and they didn't even know they did anything wrong. So please do not make these mistakes. We get a lot of times the question, an employee, an applicant wants to become my employee, applies for the job. They just almost end with their former employee, so the contract is like another 2 weeks or so, but it's really close to the end of their contract. How do I make sure that these employment agreements connect, but I don't have to pay him a salary when he's not working yet, because I don't have all his permits in order yet, because he's late? You can do this with a 0-hour employment agreement. On Curaçao, it is possible to employ someone for 0 hours a week. It's like on-call contract. A lot of you may know it, but you are not obliged to actually call them. So what we usually recommend in this kind of situations, if you really want to employ them to avoid gaps, but cannot have them work yet, you can do something like this. So you give them the contract, you make sure it connects for 0 hours. Immigration authorities will accept that because they are employed. They just are not salaried at that moment. But they do have a salary per hour, so that usually avoids any problems with the salary amounts that they need. Last thing, if something goes wrong, act quickly. Many things we can fix, especially immigration authority mistakes we can fix, but it's so much easier to fix them if it just happens. So check everything and make sure that if there's something wrong, you immediately take action.
I am Mónica Saavreda. I'm director of Living in Paradise, and I am here to give you some tips and key information about all the topics that we were talking today. So let's see. How can I help you today? Okay. First, my tips for applying for a work permit. First, check all the documents from the company. Someone asked about what documents are required. Usually the Chamber of Commerce, a recent Chamber of Commerce, cannot be older than 6 months, have to be the business license, that is the one that you get in Ventana de Información, and the ARBACE register. Those 3 documents are always necessary. And what do you have to check? You have to try to check that everything in the document is updated. Address, the director name, all those details, because sometimes you change offices and you forget to change in the 3 of them. And then when you apply for a permit, that can be reason for rejection. In some occasions, the SOA department will go to your company to inspect the necessity to hire that employee. So make sure that the address is correct in those documents, because sometimes they go for inspections and they cannot find the place. One more tip, in the vacatura, that is the, let's say, the job vacancy that you're going to publish with the government, try to put the job description as extensive as possible. Why? Because you want to make sure that those skills and those tasks, obviously, no local employee are capable to do it, because you already try to hire one. So you have to explain what exactly do you need as complete as possible. So then you have the chances that you can apply for a expat for that job position, okay? Also, you have something called the moratorium list. It's a list that the government have of professions that you cannot hire an expat. So right now, the new list is really short. It's not like as extensive, but mainly is jobs that there are low skill type of jobs. In this moment, because I do this every day, I apply for work permits, residency permits, and more for the other nationalities. So I can try to explain you with tips and with practical information today. So just ask the questions that you need. I will try to solve it at the end. But right now, what is happening? You are getting usually, it's really rare, I don't see it so much, that they are going to refuse you to apply for a permit for an expat, because right now Curaçao needs workers. So even if it's a low skill job, if you try to hire someone locally and you were not succeeding, if the profession is not mentioned explicitly in the list, for example, right now, profession is bartender. If you want to apply for a bartender, even though you try to find one locally and you couldn't find it, your application is going to be rejected, because it's in the forbidden profession. You have to find some other profession that is not there in that list. That's super important. If the employee will need to have, because you create what is required for that job position. In some positions, you need a person with a diploma or a certificate. If that's required for the position, the person have to send you the diploma, the certificate with apostille. Cannot be simple. That was changed recently. So make sure the employee can do that for you before application, okay? Otherwise, will be rejected, and then you can just appeal, and then you have to add that document, but that's going to make the process even longer, right? And also, in some industries, you will have specific requirements. So make sure you can understand, you can actually go to Ventana de Información and you can take a number and explain, okay, I need, if it's your first time and you don't have a representative, you can just go there and ask exactly what other requirements are necessary, because they depend sometimes on the industry. For example, construction companies will require to show projects. You will need to show and to add information, contracts about where are you working, to show that you have the need to get people, because here in Curaçao, you have a lot of construction companies that they are not actually active, they are not actually with projects, and they are applying for permits. So they will make sure that you really need that employee before granting the permit, okay? Okay. When it comes to hiring someone, when you want to recruit people and you want to understand when and when not you need a permit, as my colleague, the other panelist was explaining, is that in the permit, in the residency permit, you can actually see it there, but it's 3 pages of permit. So I will try to make it easier for you. Only the people that in the permit are married with Dutch citizens, they can actually work freely. They say there that is for family formation for a Dutch citizen, and then up at the bottom in the next page says that they don't need a work permit for to be employed. That's one. Second, you have the permanent permit holders that also they don't need any conditions, so they can work freely. And in some occasions, some people have here a permit to work with their own company, their own like self-employed. In that sense, you cannot hire them as an employee, but you can hire the company like as how is the name? What is the name of that? That you hire the company and the person charge you by invoice. That's also possible, right? The rest of the permits, they will need to have a work permit. As we already explained this part, if a person comes from a different company with a work permit, you can change to the work permit to your company, and in some cases, the person can work meanwhile the change is being done. In the case, for example, that you want to hire, let's say, a manager, and then the person have a valid work permit for a different company. Now you are going to start the change, but you are going to hire that person as a manager as well. That means that the person has a permit to work as a manager. In between, meanwhile, he has the valid permit, you can apply for the vacatura, and they will accept the employee to work for you. Meanwhile, the change is being done, but make sure that you immediately apply for the vacatura to start the process, and also register the employee as an employee, right? They do this, why? Because makes sense. The person, once is living here, they also acquire rights. So if you want to change companies, you can start working immediately. You are Curaçao doesn't expect you to wait for 8 months or more until the permits are ready to start working, but in some specific situations. So it's always to the best thing to do is to always double check with your lawyer or with the Ventana de Información, but I will say the lawyer, the expert, because not even in the official departments, sometimes they don't provide you with the right information, because sometimes SOA knows only about SOA and doesn't know about immigration, and that happens a lot. So in order to avoid these buracos, interruptions, and problems, it's better to just get assistance, right? And the last advice is always register your employees. Some people say, well, I don't know if the person is going to actually be a good employee or not, if I'm going to extend the contract. Don't worry. Just do a 6-month contract with a 2 months probational period and register immediately. And then if the person doesn't surpass the probational period, you can withdraw him without any problem, without even notice, right? That's in the law. But if you have an employee and you have an inspection and the employee is not registered, you will have 2 fines, one for the work permit and one for the taxes that you are not paying every month. So that's my advice. Regarding the permanent residency situation, I want to first clarify that the immigration law, the immigration procedure is completely different. That this is a little bit shocking, but it's really different to the nationality law. how to acquire the Dutch nationality, the process and the evaluation that they do over there is super different to the one for the permits. So some people say, oh, I feel good, I don't have a problem, I have my permanent permit, so for sure I will get my nationality, and then that's not the case because they review and they process in a different way. I'm going to explain those things here. What I do for my clients, my markets, my main clients are usually people from other nationalities. So I try to always make sure they are applicable for the Dutch nationality and also for the permanent permit, because sometimes you will think that you come here for 1 or 2 years, but life changes, life happens, and then the day that you want to apply, because the application was late or because some requirements were not in compliance, you will lose that chance. So I try to always make sure that I inform the company in advance. My first advice is always, if you can apply 4 months in advance of the expiration of each permit, work permit and residency permit. Usually the first permit that you get, the first work permit that you get, doesn't have an expiration date. They just say it's valid for 1 year. That is going to start being valid once the residency permit, the residency permit is approved. What is the meaning of that? I got my work permit approved today. Now I'm ready to apply for the residence permit of my employee. So I apply, and then when I get it approved, in that moment of the approval, you have a signature and you have a date that you are going to have 1 year of validity of the work permit together with the residence, right? And the rest of the permits are going to start with that. Now, the second permit, the second work permit will have a period of time, right? So when you see the period of time, if you don't have an expert helping you, you can put an alarm 4 months beforehand, or ask the employee. My advice here in the permit validity, and here, work closely with your employer and representative. What is the meaning of this? You as an employee also, you are the one that have to be worrying about your permits. So you, in your cedula, you have the expiration date of your residency permit. You have to make sure you understand which is the expiration date of your work permit and be in constant contact with your employer and also the representative to make sure they apply on time and you provide the right documents, right? So if possible, always apply for the permits 4 months before, because then you have time for everything. If something strange happened, because here in Curaçao we have strikes, we have several things, you will be okay, right? So that's super important. And second, when your situation changes, you have to change your permits. Otherwise, you will have interruptions. Maybe not for the permanent permit, but for the nationality for sure. So always check these things. Some people get a permit for 5 years because they are married with a Dutch citizen, and they get divorced after 1 year. They immediately have to change. That permit is not going to be valid anymore because the condition is that you are married for the, with that Dutch citizen. People don't understand that, but because they don't read what is in the permit. You have the obligation to understand your permits. It's in Dutch, yes, but right now you have Google Translate. You can easily see the content of each permit. Read it, because you have there the conditions that they are attached and your obligation as a citizen. Then you cannot go to court and complain that you didn't know, because they give you this document to you, and it's your duty to understand the condition of that permit, okay? So never, my advice is never leave your permit expired. Even if you don't see, I get divorced or I lose my job and I don't have any job opportunity right now, just ask for an appointment, because always you can do something in advance. When it's already the permit, when the permit has expired, then it's more difficult or impossible, because for almost everything you will need a valid cedula. So if your permit expires, your cedula will expire, and then you will not be able to do other options of permits, okay? You will have to start back again from the beginning or so. This is about the permanent residency tips. Ahora, what is buraco? Buraco is the interruption in your permits. Here I have to clarify that, remember, immigration is different from the Dutch nationality. Immigration will accept you to renew your permit even 3 months after the expiration of your permit. You can renew after 3 months expire, right? I will never advise this, never, never, because if some emergency happens, if something is missing, you will not be able to fix it. But some people can do it. You can understand, you will get the permanent permit. That's not going to be a buraco in your file at this point in the procedure in immigration. But one day late will put you out for the Dutch nationality. If you see, your permits, your residency permits are always given for 1 year. They expire always the same date. If your first permit was given the 11th of June of 2018, they will expire every 11th of June 2019, 2020, etc. Doesn't matter if you are applied late or not. How you can know if you have a buraco or not? Well, at the beginning, in the first paragraph of the residency permit, you will have the application date. You consider which date you apply. That date have to be before the expiration of the permit, right? It's not that I applied late, but I have the same year. For the nationality, you will not be able to be applicable. Like 1 day late, that's an interruption for the nationality, not for the permanent permit. So I know can be confusing, but it's not. Heard the question that they ask about the what is evaluated, only the residency permit or the work permits as well. Both of them. For the nationality, you cannot have interruptions in the residency permit and also not in the work permit. If you have interruptions, they will reject it, right? Because again, if you see the conditions that there are in each permit, they will tell you if you are a worker, the condition is the work permit, the valid work permit. In the moment that work permit expires, supposedly that residency permit is not valid anymore. You can have 1 year residency permit, and then you have an interruption in between of work permits of 2 months. Those 2 months of residency was not valid anymore in the eyes of the Dutch nationality. So it's really important that you pay attention to both of them, because again, maybe you the Dutch with more tips about it, because it's always usually you can solve it. You can solve things, not everything, but a lot of things. Okay. Again, as I was saying here, you can check yourself if you have a buraco, because you can check with your permits. You have all your permits, you can check if you apply late or not. And also you can go to immigration and ask. They will just take a number for information, and they will just check your file and can tell you when you are going to be out of buraco. How can you know when you can apply with the 10 years? Also, you have if you go to 𝗀𝗁𝗃 in your passport that you got your first permit, 𝗀𝗁𝗃 put you a small stamp. That's the date when you became a resident in Curaçao. If not, you pay 10 guilders in 𝗀𝗁𝗃 and you ask for a personal register. They call it 𝗀𝗁𝗃𝗀𝗃. So you request that document, and they tell you there since when you are a resident in Curaçao, and then from that date you will be able to apply for the permanent residency and also for the Dutch nationality. That's the date that they will use. Okay. If you have a buraco, and depending the situation and the immigration doesn't want to assist you, you will be able to also ask for a dispensation. Depending the situation, the minister is entitled to grant you a dispensation to be able to obtain the permanent permit, depending your situation. You can explain why. Maybe you were in the hospital, maybe something happened and you can actually prove it, and you have a strong case, you can ask the minister to grant you this dispensation, and you will be able to get the permanent permit, even if you have a buraco. There are also some few things changed in the law. I want to mention it here a little bit, but if you have a question, you can contact me later. People that is Brostower and people that they came before the 2005 and also 2000, and even if you have interruptions or not, you will be able to get the permanent permit as well, okay? Even if you have interruptions. So that's something also, maybe that's the case of the person that was born here and then still doesn't have a permit. I will have to check that case. Okay. If your permit was rejected in 1 year or something, and you appeal and you won the case, you will not have a buraco. Your permit can be in processing 1-2 years because you first applied, then was rejected, then you appeal, and then you won the case. The permit, it will not be interrupted. It will not. That's not a cause of buraco or interruption. Okay. In the cases that is fault of immigration, that they just took longer, or always there is a solution. If, for example, I have a permit that is on processing and is already almost ready to expire, and I don't have the answer, I will require immigration in a formal petition to get the answer, to be able to apply, and they will be forced to send me the permit before creating you interruption. So that's the thing I want to transmit here. If you are always controlling, always tracking your permits, and always let's say not trusting that everything will be solved by yourself, but you are going to be carrying on being pushy, you will not need to have any problem in getting your permanent permit if you are a little bit making sure that everything goes well. I like this part. This part is for my clients, because again, this is my job. I try to create with my clients like a long-lasting relationship where I can advise the best. I will say always start, as soon as you arrive here in Curaçao, start preparing for your Dutch nationality exams and etc. Why? Because really it's easier than you will think. The exams are really basic. The exams are not super complicated. If you are able to study a career, you will be able to study for this for sure. No problems about it. Here I make a distinction. One thing I want to tell you about nationality. There are a couple of things that they check that no one tells you about. And one is the address. You always have to change the address together with your family group. If you are coming here because your husband is working in a company and you change houses, you will have to go with your husband, with your kids, to Crunchy to change the address of all of you at the same time. In the moment your husband changed the address and you don't change the address only after 2 months, that is going to be an interruption of in your permit when you want to apply for the Dutch nationality. So you always have to inform Crunchy every time you change the address immediately. Otherwise, I have a case of a person that he didn't change the address, but the new tenant went to register in Crunchy, and they said, oh, in that house, this person is living. And they say, no, doesn't live there anymore. I live there now. And they took her out from Crunchy. The person stayed like without address for 3 months, right? And then there was a reason to reject the nationality based on that the person doesn't have residency in Curaçao. Of course, all these things can be fought in court, and in the majority of cases, we will win, because you can prove residency with the contract of the house, with the passport showing that you didn't left Curaçao, etc. But you will be in the burden of carry on with this extra procedure. So that's one. 1 day late is 1 day late for the nationality in work permit and residency permit. And mainly those are the main things that people don't know and the main reasons why you don't get the nationality. Apart from that, you will be fine. You just have to prepare for the exams. 3 years only if you are married with a Dutch citizen. 5 years the other situations of the permits. This is only for residency permit, not for short stay permits, right? Here I put what they usually check: address, not interruption, the last health insurance. Remember, you always have to have a private health insurance, so they will ask the valid health insurance. So far, they are not asking for all the health insurance. What years they review? The years that are mentioned here. Here they will review the last 3 years, and you will have to still be married. In the moment you divorce, you cannot apply here. Then here, what they are going to review? The last 5 years. Yeah, so the last 5 years of residency, of work permit, and all these things here, right? Conditions mentioned in the permit. That's why you have to read your permits. And in this case, when people they don't want to present exams, when you can request the Dutch nationality without exams when you have 15 years of residency, but only if the last 3 years and still you are married with a Dutch citizen at that moment, or if you are 65. The rest of the people will need exams. So my advice is just do it. Is prepare yourself, don't wait too long. And these are the main things that they are going to be reviewed. Okay, that was a little bit fast, but I just try to comply all the key part informations, and I think that hopefully with this you will understand that if you do it right, this process of residency for other people, not Dutch and Americans, is not as terrible as we might think, and probably maybe hopefully the government will start doing this process a little bit more efficient. The hard part is the first permit. The renewal should not be a problem if you are well informed. I don't know if you have questions.